Hello, and welcome to Commendable Commotion. I'm Matthew Tanamelgi, and I'll be speaking to some fascinating people about some equally fascinating topics that need more commotion around them. Today's episode is largely about cinema and writing, two topics which sometimes do deserve more attention. I'll be talking to Thomas Mozden, who has written numerous film reviews and essays for headstuff.org and has also contributed to Books Ireland magazine. Thomas and I were both in the Film and Video Society at University College Dublin, and Thomas used to organise the Cineclub, where students such as myself would watch films and have lengthy analytical discussions about them afterwards. Among other things, Thomas will tell us about how he got into writing about film, the importance of cinema, and he'll also tell us about a very interesting project that he's currently working on. So, I hope you enjoy this chat, and if you're an aspiring filmmaker or writer, then I really hope you take on board Thomas's excellent advice. I remember the Cineclub and how great it was, and you hosted a lot of those movies we would watch. Some great insights into filmmaking and philosophy and history and all these things. But first, who are you and what do you do? Who is Thomas Mosden, if you would?
Well, that's it's a good question to start with because it's one I never have a very good answer for. As you said, I'm Thomas Marsden. Most of the time, I'm a bookseller, but if I had any say in the matter, I'd be allowed more time to write. I suppose that's my, or I suppose that's the thing that's taken most of my attention recently. I think last summer, probably around August. Started contributing film reviews and features to Head Stuff. So if I was ever a brave enough individual, I'd say I'm a film critic or something like that. Because that's certainly I think that's what's occupying my attention more and more recently, which is certainly something that I think builds off. You mentioned the Cineclub. Very, very much coming from that same kind of place, thinking about, those discussions we had and trying to find, I guess, especially after the last few years, haven't had that same kind of community. So I suppose finding a way to do it in my own time, as it were. So that's who I am at the minute, anyway.
In terms of how you got into film analysis, film reviewing, film essays, how did that all come about, if you recall?
Yeah, well, I think I had always been interested in movies. I grew up particularly watching horror films. That was what I was exposed to mostly through my mother. Anything, she grew up, or she came of age in the 80s. The American slasher boom, that sort of thing. So I had seen a lot of that and enjoyed it. And very slowly through, we had the internet, and this is when we still had brick and mortar video shops, rental shops, that sort of thing, and being allowed to pick stuff off the shelves, whatever kind of looked interesting, and being kind of slowly introduced to things through family or friends, and at the time it was voracious. I'd watched just about anything, very uncritically, admittedly. I just wanted to see as much as I could, and I was allowed to. It was a very, I guess, permissive in that sense. But I got, as I got older, naturally, I started to get a little bit more serious about it. And again, it was mostly through meeting people who were also interested and who were very serious about it. Coming to college, I attended Cineclub before I presented it. It was run previously by Luca Vukos and Annie Osakainen. Apologies for the mispronunciation, I'm sure. But that was my first opportunity to kind of watch films seriously and then discuss them seriously, and that was something that I know it seemed, maybe in the years leading up to it, seemed like a whole other world. You know, because like I said, even though I was watching a lot of things, you know, and enjoyed a lot of things, you know, there just really weren't any opportunities to, or yeah, to share that with other people, which is what, you know, to have, you know, I mean, maybe it's a bit obvious, but to have those kinds of conversations, yeah, you need other people. And you know, you learn, or I learned anyway, a lot about what I enjoy by hearing other people tell me. You know, you know, hearing what other people thought about films that I might have seen dozens of times before, but were suddenly very different, uh, you know, based on that kind of communal experience, which is maybe what I was missing before.
And in terms of then, like, sharing your thoughts on film to a wider audience, like, with your writing and your essays written online and submitted online, how did you get into that then? How did you, make that career jump?
Um, I just sort of asked, I guess, you know, it was something that, you know, I'd been thinking about it for some time before that. I knew when I first started at Head Stuff, Stephen Portzio was the editor of the film section, and I knew him a bit from college and a bit just from around, you know, the IFI and that sort of thing, and I knew that's what he did, but I had never, I guess, just made the jump and to ask like, hey, is this, you know, could I possibly do this? And and again, it's like one of those things. It felt like something other people did, you know. And then I know one day you know, just sort of you know, and I because I read a lot of film criticism as well. So you know, it's something I was interested in already. And then just, I guess, one day finally just did it. And was like, hey, is there a way I can get involved? And then did, you know, found a couple of films that I was interested in writing about, um, which helped, you know, having that kind of, you know, fortunately, I suppose where I am now, it's there is that bit of a free for all. You know, I don't get assigned anything, so when I write about something, it's usually something I've thought about prior. You know, something I have a standing interest in. So that kind of, you know, I suppose it was, I don't want to say low stakes, because, you know, it's something, you know, I do take it seriously, but it was, um you know, a great way, I guess, to take that shift from academic writing, which is grand, but you know, finding a good way into writing for an audience who actually wants to read what who actually wants to read something, or might be interested in reading something, I suppose. Yeah, so just taking the leap.
Yeah, yeah, and no, it's interesting. And so, like, I mean, you've written about, I've read your head stuff, essays and reviews, and you deal with a lot of genres. So, you've the yakuza kind of genre,
Yeah.
crime genre. You've horror. There's romance there. There's sci-fi there. Like, what genres would particularly interest you? I know that, like, there are just so many, so there's no simple answer to that. But
Yeah.
what genres would draw you in the most, and why, if possible?
I think the things I tend to be drawn to most quickly are the things that I've been interested in from a young age. So like I've mentioned horror. So that's something I'm just interested in. Um I'm always curious about what scares us and why, and what does that reveal about, you know, ourselves, or you know, the society that it out of which it arrives, that sort of thing. You know, same thing with, you know, I don't know if I've written a whole lot on science fiction, but you know, that's something I'd be drawn to as well. And I think those, you know, science fiction and horror are more closely related than we often allow. But that was something I you know, as a teenager was interested in, and as was, you know, a couple of the you know, like you said, you mentioned the yakuza thing. Yeah, you know, the gangs. I've always liked gangsters. I think, like a lot of, um young boys, oh man, it would be really cool to be a gangster, wouldn't it? But those were, those were just kind of the films I was interested in high school. The Godfather, Martin Scorsese, those sorts of things. So those are in some way foundational, I guess. And I'll always be naturally kind of drawn to that. But I think as I've gotten older, that those genres don't go away. But the thing I've discovered, I suppose, as I've gotten older, is kind of a wider interest in, let's just say, films from other countries, from other cultures, that sort of thing. I tend to be drawn to, I tend to perk up at that these days more than genre, and I think that comes a bit from getting older, seeing a bit of the world, Hollywood. A lot of the films I would have seen, growing up in the States, was very, they were very, let's just say Anglo-centric. And even if I kind of, I discovered like Godard and Bergman, Tarkovsky fairly young, but those were very, very isolated canonical figures. And I think, with some of the stuff I've had the opportunity to write about, in the last year, and even just generally, in the cinema or DVDs and stuff like that, is I love picking stuff up. I love listening to languages that I don't understand, and I like the way places look. I guess so. There's still, to bring it back to your question, there are those kind of generic concerns, but I think I owe it to myself, and I owe it to whoever might be reading these reviews, to just I suppose make people aware of the fact that there are films that aren't just coming out of Hollywood, and I think that's one of my motivations, has always been one of my motivations, if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's an important point. And like, how do you think people, as well as obviously reading works such as yours, how can people become more, aware of that? I know I know it's maybe a superhuman sort of question to ask. I don't know, but I mean, it's a difficult task. So, any suggestions?
It is, but I think we're fortunate, and to take recent, we can look at recently. The thing that has kind of dominated this type of question is South Korea. We had Parasite won, the best picture at the Academy Awards 2 or 3, whatever year, I can't remember what year it was, but that was kind of a big hit. And then you had more recently on Netflix, you had Squid Game, which I've not seen, but has invited that question again, or kind of brought that into the light again. And I think, I was fortunate enough, I grew up, say, with Netflix back when, they still sent you discs in the post and that sort of thing. And the thing that any kind of streaming platform allows, is I guess it just, in the best possible, it doesn't always work out this way, but it has the potential to aggregate films and television programs or documentaries or whatever it is from all over the world, which might not be box office successes anywhere, which is kind of what what determines what gets shown in the cinema very often is it's an economic decision rather more so than a cinematic or aesthetic decision, but streaming platforms, I suppose, again, in the most positive sense, they don't always live up to this, but there is that potential to host films that might have a very small audience, but they'll be very passionate about it. And I'm not quite answering your question yet, but I suppose maybe what I'm trying to say is, first, just making those films from international films, if you want to just call them that, world cinema, to use a generic term, is just first thing to do is just to make them available. People will find them. The people who are curious will seek them out, or they will listen to a recommendation. You know, like that. It's really just, yeah. I guess, yeah, that's really just the first thing, is making it available and having someone around who's willing to say, hey, you should check this out. You know, it might not be, you know, the shiniest, most popular thing, but it's there, and you know, we all owe it to ourselves to make those kinds of decisions on our own, I suppose. If that makes any sense, you know, just being curious, I guess, is really is the best thing you can do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, and it's a bit easier with streaming platforms in some ways. I know what you mean. It is important, and having people, you know, these top film directors who'll come out and say, like, you know, here's this Italian film from the 1970s, go check it out. In fact, let's reissue it. And then there's the Criterion collection and all this kind of thing. So yeah, those are that's a good advice, definitely a good bit of advice. And in terms of your film work, practically as well as in, you know, written,
Yeah.
would you be able to describe that? Because I think I read you do a bit of film producing, that kind of thing, or, you know, other tasks as well.
Other tasks, I suppose, is the way. You know, I did a couple of short films as, you know, kind of student short films, which, you know, the less said about the better. It was a lot of fun, you know, learning experience. But that's sort of, you know, most of what I've done since then for my own stuff is, you know, writing. Yeah, I've been working on kind of a, I suppose, a semi-autobiographical feature script that on and off, you know, it's been a while since I've looked at it seriously, and I think it's something I need to circle back around to in some way or another, you know, find something else to write for a bit. But so then I suppose most of what I've been doing then, practically speaking, is, I mentioned Luca Vukos earlier, who was one of the founders of Cineclub, who you know, ran it before I took it over. He you know, very graciously left it for me. He has since made two short films, Lose Like a Human and ISS Overs, which, you know, my involvement with those were minimal, mostly, you know, I suppose some comments on the script writing. You know, I didn't have any hand in the scripts, but, you know, we talk a lot about what he's doing. So I'm, you know, very opinionated when it comes to those things, and I tend to make it known, in just sort of, you know, through the editing process, and just kind of, you know, commenting on some of the cuts and stuff like that. You know, certainly airing more on the producery side of things, you know, writing or helping him, you know, researching festivals and getting those kinds of applications ready. So I think that that's been, as far as filmmaking goes, that's been mostly what I've been doing in recent years, is just sort of helping, if you know, maybe as a way to avoid confronting my own tasks of writing, as it were. Yeah, so that's sort of, yeah, I think what I've been doing more so in the last few years, lending an ear, as it were.
Well, that's very interesting, and the I mean, it's all interesting, first of all, but the semi-autobiographical script. Now, I understand, you know, you may not want to talk much about it yet. It's
Yeah.
a work in progress, but I mean, it sounds very interesting, and, you know, so I mean, it takes a lot of guts to be, you know, to be producing something or writing something. I'm using producing in the general sense of the word, obviously. You know, to be making something that's close to home, as it were, or that you know, opens up a bit about yourself, kind of a thing. So how, I mean, like, how's that going? I know you mentioned you haven't looked at it in a bit of a while, but I mean, so you'd be interested in circling back to it at some point?
Yeah, no, I usually do. You know, it's something I come back to occasionally, and it started, I suppose, as much as anything, to teach myself a little bit about how to write a script, as much as anything. You know, it was just a way of, okay, can I write something that makes sense? You know, because like I said, I did a couple of short films in college, but, you know, nothing, you know, they were 10 pages at most, you know. So, you know, can I write something longer? And, you know, that old kind of platitude, write what you know, certainly allowed, kind of helped me to get started, because it answered some questions. And you know, the first version of that, I mean, the very first draft I wrote was very much, you know, I guess as a framework of recollections. Even it was okay. Let me just get a few things on paper, and I had very much under the influence. If it helps you to think about it, I had shortly after or shortly before I started writing it, I had rewatched Robert Altman's MASH, so I had this sort of ensemble thing in mind when I was trying to write it. Mostly just trying to get, you know, certain characters and stuff, you know, certain characters, locations, and scenarios down on paper as a way to start. And you know, I let a few people read it, and you know, the first thing, everyone who read it recognized was, no, you need to bring someone into the center, you know, because you know, you need to have a character, a lead character, even if it's, you know, it doesn't have to be you know, just a perspective, I suppose, which, you know, and then again, having that vaguely autobiographical background, you know, they picked him out quite easily. So when I kind of rewrote that first bit, you know, it went from getting these kind of recollections down on paper in a very you know, loose sort of way, and finding a way to just tighten the strings a little bit, you know, to bring it a little more closely around, again, an individual, you know, still having that ensemble, but you know, having a very kind of clear perspective, and then you know, making sure something happens, which was so as I started rewriting it, it became, fortunately became less autobiographical. You know, my intent was never to write a true story, you know, based on true story anyway. You know, it was always going to kind of, I wanted it to become its own thing, but I suppose, you know, keeping it close to home just kind of kept me focused initially, and you know, I got however many number of scenes out of that, and you know, hey, maybe it might be like an act and a half to maybe just arbitrarily put a framework on it. So you know, in chipping away at it, I think, you know, what I really need to do would be to sit down and write something really self-contained, kind of take what I learned in that process, do something completely different, and then come back to it. You know, because when, you know, even as it strays from biography, it can be really, you can get stuck on those things, I guess. All right, that's what I've found. You know, getting stuck on things because you know, you've remembered in a certain way, even though you're, you know, I'm telling myself, well, that doesn't really matter. It's still just a story. And you know, as with anything, it's just a matter of, you know, sitting myself down and keeping myself focused. That discipline, I guess, and that's something I've let myself get away with in relation to that particular project. Yeah, that's kind of where that is.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And so, like, I mean, was it just purely practical then, getting your recollections and having it as a framework, you know, how to develop your writing kind of a thing? Or was it particularly that you wanted to express certain things about your life or your past or anything like that, that you particularly wanted to express to people? Or was it just purely practical mostly, or, you know?
Well, I mean, it was practical, and I think, you know, those other things you listed are, you know, have their practical value as well. You know, there was a sense of, I don't think I've ever been overly concerned with making myself, or you know, making my past, say, clear to other people so much as for myself. So it had a certain, I shudder at the thought, but I'll say, you know, a certain therapeutic value. You know, getting certain things down on paper. Um, you know, I mean, I guess gives myself, or you know, a certain distance from myself to look at it in a different way. Um, you know, maybe with a degree of honesty I wouldn't have otherwise had. to kind of confront these things at a point, when I started writing it, that maybe I wasn't doing at all. Whether there's any, I don't know that there's anything too grandiose to take from it. That might be something that comes out more clearly as as I finish it, and in subsequent drafts, kind of making it something other than just a sort of diaristic exercise, because I think there's always a little bit of ourselves in what we write, I think, unconsciously or otherwise, and maybe starting off as I did with that, from memory, obviously just made those aspects a bit explicit, and whether it's an accurate depiction of myself and some of the people I knew when I was younger, probably not. It's but it is, when you're characterizing yourself, I suppose maybe, you have to ask yourself some hard questions, and how you answer those will dictate how you move forward in that project.
Like that. Yeah, and I see what you mean. Yeah, so and like, I mean, would you be, I mean, I know it's very early days, but would you be able to talk about some of your thoughts on kind of what the general plot would be or storyline would be? But again, I understand it's a work in progress, so maybe it's too early to tell. Or...
No, I think it took a while to get there, but I did eventually get a shape. So before I came to Ireland for college, I spent 4 years in the Marines, in the United States Marines. I went to Afghanistan a few times, or twice. Shouldn't say a few times. Went to Afghanistan twice. So the script is start. It's very much set during that first deployment. I suppose it is. It's it's a war film without the war, I guess. And I maybe if I would allow myself to be somewhat, or to think big thoughts, there really haven't been any films that I know of, about the U.S. involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. Certainly not any films that have been critical. And I think when I started writing it, is I wanted to do something like that. I wanted, making an anti-war film is very hard, and there's no big explosions in the script or anything like that. But I think one of the things I wanted to do, and something you realize as you get older, is that when I was over there, I was 19. The oldest person there was probably 30 something. It's and again, this is another one of those platitudes, but I think it's something we forget every few generations. We tend to forget this, is we were kids, kids with toys, wrapped up in something we didn't really understand, in a country we didn't understand, with a culture we didn't understand. And I think I was at that age, growing up in southwestern Pennsylvania, I took a lot of those things at face value, despite being vaguely aware that it was all frankly kind of bullshit. Still got kind of caught up in it, I suppose. And I think that sense of kind of youthful ignorance, and that sort of the jingoistic pride Americans take in the military, is hugely troubling. Only more so now that again, I'm a few years older. I've lived away from the States for a few years, so you can again, seeing it at a distance that I didn't have when I was 18 years old. And, I grew up interested, I suppose, growing up, I was very aware of the say anti-Vietnam, the anti, all of that, and some of the films that came out of that. And it struck me that these things take time, but there hasn't really been, again, I don't think any cinematic um an attempt to grapple with it cinematically. And so like the scenario as it was going to take shape, again, wasn't based in any, maybe it's, like I said, it started from certain recollections, but it wasn't based in any sort of, reality. I was going to be quite liberal with what actually happened. But I think I was just interested in taking a film with a very limited setting, about people who have no idea what they've gotten, no idea, I guess, no idea with what they were doing, what they were involved with, kind of, ignorance of their surroundings, dropping them in a little setting and poking and prodding things, try to make it as, I don't know, find those little absurdities, that are really hard to talk about, but which I think make for really interesting images. And I think, that's partly where I've gotten stuck in the writing is, is how to do that effectively. Not just in the dialogue, the first draft or whatever was very dialogue, we might have a character saying something like, this is really stupid, this is really dumb, why are we here, which is, again, bit platitudinous. But I suppose, having to work with that intention, but finding a more, cinematic, a more, an image, to communicate that sympathy or that type of idea. So I think I just want to, again, to answer your question, I was interested in writing a film about how dumb we were and how absurd the situation was and how ignorant we were, that type of thing.
Wow, no, I mean that sounds exciting, if that's the right word to use, given the subject matter. But I mean, it sounds so interesting, and given you mentioned about it being mostly dialogue driven, I think you kind of implied, at least there,
Initially, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it would work well as a play, or as a film, or would you, like, which are you open to kind of different ideas of how it will, the medium that may change, or do you
Yeah,
want it to specifically be a film, which is understandable, or
I never really considered it as anything else, because one of the things I was interested in exploring, and again, this is one of those things where kind of technical experience, where I'm just sort of lacking, it is, I think you need the desert. In my mind, it's a desert film more than anything. More important than any of the characters or in the scenario, is that sense of heat, of sand, and because that was one of the things that I came away with, and maybe the thing I've thought back on the most was the country itself. It was, it was something, if you watch the news broadcasts, say, about what was going on, you got no sense of the desert and the people who lived there. Well, that was just because that's not newsworthy, I suppose. And not that couldn't work in a different medium, in a book or in a, say, on the stage. I think the desert the desert just looks really good on film. It's on my mind again recently with Pasolini's Gospel According to Matthew, and that was kind of a long-standing reference in my head for a type of a location type of shoot. The desert, the setting of that, you can't fake that. And you could try, but it would never really work. So like I even if even if I never really figure out what the film would be about or what exactly I want to say about it, the one thing I know for certain is that if I ever in a million years had the opportunity to realize it, it would have to be in the desert. That's just, to me, that's just central to it's central to it. It's the only way to make sense of I suppose um, the best way to I guess give some flesh to that ignorance I had or we had more generally is to plop a small group of actors into the middle of the desert, because you don't need to understand anything else about the situation when you can I suppose when you can feel it, you know how alien that landscape is to a boy from the suburbs. And so I think that would be the one thing, my one irritating auteur thing would be, no, in the desert.
And
Sand in your feet.
yeah, no, exactly. And like, let's say, we gave you a budget, here you go and make the film. Would you, I mean, presumably maybe Afghanistan itself you would take as a location. Would there be, would you be open to the idea of, like, substituting a particular location for another one? Because you mentioned the Gospel According to Matthew. I know was some of that, I could be wrong, but was some of it filmed in southern Italy, and it was obviously, meant to replicate the Middle East and
Yeah,
that thing.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. No, I mean, it's something I am also aware. Practically speaking, a location shoot probably wouldn't be possible. I would love. I don't know if this would ever be possible, but I'd love to get back to Afghanistan as a normal person, just to see it again. But I do think it would have to be shot elsewhere, and I know that's how the cinematic apparatus works. I think in my more, again, thinking about the thumb in the eye, one of the things I've suggested to people once or twice would be to shoot it at Monument Valley in was that New Mexico, I think, or Arizona, where John Ford shot all those westerns. I'm would it work? I don't know, but I guess playing with that idea of taking a distinctly American iconography and using that as a background to point out how how authoritarian that iconography is, how all those things, so just really anywhere, like I said, I'm sure it's repetitive at this point, but just needs to be in the desert. Like, I think that's the central character in the film, other than myself, of course, is that setting, is the desert. And it just, I love the texture of it. I love the texture of it, how it looks on film. There are a few films that I think capture it quite well. And yeah, so it'd be something, do some location scouting in my dreams. But yeah, I think if I could ever just find the place that looks right, it would take care of itself.
Yeah, Beau Travail captured it quite well.
Yeah.
You mentioned MASH. Apart from MASH and including MASH, any inspirations, who would inspire your film work and your writing, whether it's reviews or filmmaking, script writing kind of thing? What would your inspirations be for that film in particular, and your work in general?
For that film in particular, we'll answer that question first. Pick up on the momentum. There is the MASH thing. Like I said, that's sort of what started it, and whatever I would come up with would certainly stray from that. But there was just something about the way people talk. There's just something about the way people talk in Altman's films that no one else has figured out. I think, and a lot of it has to do with how he records dialogue. the actors often talk, I think particularly with MASH, Gould and Sutherland spoke, well, we never really knew who was the focus in the scene. We didn't know who the camera was on. He shot, long lenses and that sort of thing. And, that's something you can't do that with, we can't really do that with, say, movie stars. Altman found a way, but you have to be a more, I don't know, if I can say one annoying thing, you have to be open to the process, I suppose. But no, I think, when I'm thinking about influences more generally, some of the guys are, and unfortunately they do tend mostly to be guys, which is that's a whole other, that'll be for the next episode. But I think, when I think about films, the people that I tend to fall back on more often than not, folks like, and this is just broad, I'm speaking broadly now, but guys like, Godard, is one of those figures that I constantly come back to. There's always something to discover there. I've recently, I recently discovered, or not discovered, but I recently became aware of Jean-Marie Straub and Danielle Fouillet, which has been, again, really eye-opening. What you can do, ostensibly with very simple techniques. The kind of things you can accomplish. I kind of became aware of them reading Jonathan Rosenbaum, an American film critic who's written for loads of different publications, but he was the regular reviewer for one of the Chicago paper that wasn't the one Roger Ebert wrote for a time. And I've been using him. He's, I suppose, right now my gold standard for film reviewing. Certainly one of the people I read and thought, okay, I'd like to try this. But he's also been very helpful in discovering some of those, I say filmmakers like Straub-Piet, or some of experimental filmmakers he writes about, Michael Snow and James Benning. I think some folks who I can't pretend to have any expertise on or have even seen in some cases, but I suppose he's opened up opened vistas that were previously closed. Recently I've been obsessed with, I think that the best film I've seen maybe ever, but certainly the last few years, was by Tsai Ming-Ling. Had a film that came out last year called Days, which was reinvigorating. Again, it was just, if there's a future of, if cinema has a future, it starts with Days. I think that's the challenge that cinema as an art form has to rise to. And on top of, he's made other fantastic films as well. I was fortunate in the before times, he was at the IFI during the East Asian Film Festival. So I got to see him speak with Tony Raines and Lee Kang Sheng, I think his actor is called, the guy who's starred in most of his films. So that's something I've been obsessing about recently. If you can ask anyone who spent any amount of time with me recently, Days is all I'm talking about. Pedro Costa is another one of those kind of more contemporary filmmakers. Again, a lot of these are kind of old dudes. So not exactly, maybe not necessarily straying off the path too far. But I think those are the kind of films in a rambling roundabout sort of way that have kind of dominated my thinking the last few years. There's just a serious, there's a seriousness, a rigor that these filmmakers bring to filmmaking that is really just inspiring. I think it can be easy to get discouraged about the state of contemporary filmmaking. Everyone has their take on Marvel and all that, and frankly, I think that whole conversation is boring because it's too focused on what's going on right now. But I've been fortunate enough to have seen a few films recently that suggest that there's still really exciting things we can do with filmmaking, with cinema generally, with relatively simple tools. And I think if there was something, if there was something I'd like to hold myself to as a critic, as an aspiring filmmaker, or even just as someone who likes to talk about films with people, is, I guess that's the standard I want to hold myself to, is figuring out what that future looks like, or what the potential that it has, if I can allow that, to paint myself in such strokes.
Well, so it's sort of like, the opportunities like kind of have been broadened for young people to make films and make their own creative projects. So, I mean, like, how, like, the importance of cinema and the arts and this kind of thing, and attention given to them and the craft of making them. I suppose you'd agree it's important that people realize that. Do you think it's easier for people to realize that, just given, the sort of swathes of like different technological opportunities, creative opportunities young people can have? Do you think it's relatively easy, or do you think it's quite a challenge to get people to realize that importance?
I think it's still. I mean, there's always a difficulty. The thing about art, if we can maybe speak about it in the broadest possible terms, is art is inessential, shall we say? That's the kind of thing that we're constantly being told. I very often remember towards the start of the first lockdown, the UK, there was that minister of whomever, enterprise or whatever it was a poster of the ballet dancer. She's retraining in cyber, and so can you. So we're constantly being told that these things aren't important, because they don't make you rich, or they're not. I don't know. It's not, basically it's not technology. But it's in that inessentialness that the importance of art comes out. That it isn't vital, say, quote, air quotes, vital, is exactly why it's so important. And there's a lot of, let's just say, noise you have to get through to arrive at that. And it's something, because, say, getting a start in filmmaking, just to stick with what we're talking about, it is in a lot of ways easier than it's ever been. Phones have cameras on them. Digital cameras are accessible. There's no longer, the technical requirements for shooting on film and developing film and exhibiting film. They're just, they don't have to be there for, if you just want to go out on the weekend and shoot a short film kind of thing on it, like, so ostensibly it's as easy as it's easier than it's ever been, shall we say. And obviously you would like to build on that into, hey, I went from doing this to shooting on film. That's a great kind of trajectory. But you don't need it to get started anymore. And there's there's something freeing about that. I mean, we've all did it. I know we used to, 48-hour film challenges and that sort of thing. And it's something, we're all able to do. But I suppose it can be discouraging, because there's not always a clear path. Well, how do I do this thing? How can I take this thing I'm really passionate about and do it, and do it seriously? Because cost of living is being what it is. It can be hard. You might have to sacrifice a lot to take it to that next level. But then, even then, I think a lot of that is, again, coming back to that idea of noise. Sure, you're making these films, but what are you doing that's serious? How are you going to put food on the table? And those, not that those questions go away, but the thing that's constantly being reinforced is that those types of artistic or creative avenues aren't serious. Not in the way that, I don't know, programming apps is serious. We're all just Elon Musk in the waiting. That's what we all like to think. But if even if that is the case, what a dire state that world would be in if that's all there was to living. And so I think in its inessential, that inessential quality is exactly what is so invigorating about anything creative. And I think if it's maybe somewhat utopian. I know it's something Kurt Vonnegut says somewhere, like, write a poem, even if it's bad, your soul is enriched. You're better for the experience. And but we're constantly, I guess there's just that thing, you're constantly, well, how can I make money out of this? You gotta put that out of your head, because strictly speaking, I think if we all wrote poetry more often, we'd be on a good, that would be a good start to understanding ourselves better. Again, maybe it's utopic, but it is maybe one of the few things I do actually believe in. If we could flex these creative muscles more often, without, I don't know. Yeah, I just think that we'd all be better for it. To cut a rambling answer short.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely, it's I suppose it's kind of like one of those things. When I say importance of the arts, I know what you mean. Like, really, it's probably a bit of a bland way of describing it, because that quote kind of always resonates with me. From Oscar Wilde. What was it? Something like all art is essentially useless. But it's kind of when you realize that it actually feels much more. You feel freer sometimes doing it.
Yeah.
For that very reason. So no, I see what you mean, and it's wise words indeed, and very, very interesting about the projects you're developing. And it'll take time, I suppose, if you want to be if you want to give it time so it comes to fruition the right way. It's always a good approach, and it's always a good sign. So it's been very interesting, Thomas, and great insights from you. If there's well, no, absolutely, and your writings are great as well. I mean, I'd urge everyone to check out your work on what is it now, Head Stuff.
Head Stuff, yeah.
Anywhere else people can find you? Anywhere else at all?
That's pretty much it at the moment. I'm not heavy on the social media. I don't post anything interesting there. Most of my writing at the minute or I should say, all of my writing at the minute is going up on Head Stuff. I've done a single book review for Books Ireland magazine. So that's a fun. You can try to find that if you're so inclined. But I suppose I'm Momo No Aware on Instagram. So whatever I do tend to write finds its way onto there. Usually there's a link somewhere. I'm told I'm not very good at it. But it's there somewhere, whether you believe it or not.
Cool. No, absolutely. Well, thanks very much. I mean, unless there's anything you'd like to add, I mean, anything about the challenges of filmmaking or anything like that, or just anecdotes from your work, it's been very interesting. So
I say, as a final word, no, just I mean, thank you for having me. And if there's one thing I want to leave you with and leave everyone with, is just watch more films. That's the you can put that on my headstone. Watch more films, and I don't care what you do, just watch more films and talk about them, because it's a communal, cinema, it's a communal activity. So yeah, do it more often.